Hey everybody, my name is Mark Peter Davis. They asked me to come in and talk about operational lessons learned, and I'll go through a few things here. I thought I'd title the talk Avoid the Cliff, because we're all gyrating off a cliff when you're running a startup. That's helpful. And if you play the game right and hopefully use some of these lessons, which hopefully are helpful, maybe you can make a right turn along the way somewhere. Okay, quick introduction. I'm the founder and managing partner of a firm called Interplay Ventures. We are a foundry/investment firm. We're about 2 years old at this point. We've started or co-founded or incubated 12 companies, invested in another 6 or 7. In aggregate, we've created about 120 jobs in the course of 2 years and built something real. I'll show you a little bit more about it. I also authored a book called The Fundraising Rules. I've been a lifelong entrepreneur. It's not something I chose. It's something that's ingrained in me. It's something I'm passionate about. I pretended to be a venture capitalist for a little while, and while I was a VC, I watched many great entrepreneurs come to the doors, screw up the pitch, and not raise money. And I was watching that. I started documenting and writing, trying to make the process more transparent, to coach people through the process. And that turned into a book. It's a handbook for entrepreneurs, written in chronological form, and will take people all the way through the fundraising process. It's a great way to help navigate the process and to get more sleep if you're having trouble sleeping. All right, just a little snapshot. Venture Juice. Check it out if you're a founder. It's a site we set up to introduce folks, entrepreneurs, to different service providers that we use. We've started 7 service providers in the space that are focused on serving startups. We've reimagined those experiences to be what founders would have created for themselves. In fact, many of these startups are founded by people from the startup community. Just to give you an example, Nomad Financial on the bottom left is a finance firm which does bookkeeping, CFO work, and beyond. And the founder of it was the head of finance at Vimeo. DevSpark is offshore development, software engineering. TwentyPine is a recruiting firm. Truman James helps startups navigate their office space issues from co-working and beyond, the big office spaces. Founder Shield's an insurance brokerage for startups. Venwise is a learning group, but for folks who are kind of further along in terms in the process of the company. And Moral Lane is a marketing service firm for startups and bigger companies. I've probably been involved with 3 or 4 dozen companies at this point, either as an investor, a founder. I have massively succeeded, massively failed, been involved in operating and an investor capacity. And maybe that's why they brought me in to talk about this, but I'm going to share with you a couple of things that I've learned along the way. 33%. Now we're into the meat of the talk. In any industry, and probably any sport, say baseball, that is a horrible hit rate. But for venture folks, for VCs, that's about as good as it gets. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong in companies. I'm not going to obviously be able to cover even a small sliver of that today. But there's a number of things that I experienced personally that I think are a little bit more conceptual and helpful that can provide some guiding light and lessons learned for how to tackle this. I'm just going to cover 5. I think it's about 5. First is no oil tankers. If you're building a tech company or any type of operation, you've probably heard about lean development, customer development. And I think the lesson I learned in relearning that already pre-existing phrase is how painful that can be. And I'll make a point on this. Let me take a tech company, for example. If you go out and build a product and you build a huge product, we all know that's a bad idea to do before you go out and get customer validation. The reason we think that's bad is because you've invested a lot of money before you know it's going to work. But it's even worse than that. And the second dimension of that, the compounding factor, was the thing that surprised me. Recovering once you've built an oil tanker is nearly impossible. And there's reasons for this. Once you've got, let's say if anyone who's familiar with code, 9 or 10 services, those are elements of a software code base, instead of 2 or 3, which a smaller tech stack will have. Every time you have to correct a bug or fix an issue, you have to do it 3 to 4 times as many places. It will slow you down. So I've been down this path. I won't spend much time on this because this is probably the most well-discussed concept out in the market, but I want to reiterate it. And I'd like to actually apply it to organizations as well. Everything we do at Interplay, we're building Interplay and all the companies within it in the lean methodology. We actually build all of the organizational elements, not just the code or the product, in the same way. We build something, we try to break it, we fix it, and then we layer on top. That's everything from adding a head of talent into our recruiting team, because you don't know exactly how that head of talent's going to operate, what processes they need, how they communicate within the organization, before you add another second or third recruiting person. The metaphor I like to use is when you think about people building skyscrapers, and this I think has helped a lot of entrepreneurs, the way we see them go up is they build the frame of the building, all 20 stories, then they build all the interior, and I'm not an architect, so the engineer construction folks in the room will be like, that's what he's talking about, which is true. And then you see them putting the glass on. They're basically building the whole building at once to a certain extent, layer by layer. When you're building your company in every dimension, operational, product, and beyond, I would think of it as this. Build one floor, finish it. Get customers in it. Break it, kick it, make sure it doesn't fall down, rebuild it, tweak it, and then build the second floor. If you have that mindset, I think you will build a sturdier building as you build your company. Buy after the pain. Pain is good. Everyone is trying to prevent the painful part of building a company by getting resources early. And the painful part could be not having the right people on your team. It could be not having an engineering time. It could be not having the marketing budget you need. After having had enough cash to pave over the pain very quickly by spending money against things that we necessarily didn't need, it became obvious to me that if you don't let the pain crystallize by letting those problems exist in your organization for just long enough, you may not buy the right solution. So for example, you have a company that needs a salesperson. Okay, you need sales. What type of salesperson? What's the style that they need to have? Or they need to be good on the phone or good in person? What you need to do is get to the point where you're doing enough selling and you're really in the pain of needing the salesperson. You've lived the pain for a while, to where you've identified a more detailed understanding of what you need. Pain clarifies. Wallow in the pain just a little bit longer if you're a founder than you think you should. I find that will help you actually make sure you're putting the right pieces in place as you build your building to make sure you get each story strong. Get a better lens. My photos are generally pretty worthless in most of my talks. This is the first time I've given this talk. I usually give a talk on fundraising, so hopefully it's helpful. Get a better lens. One of the mistakes I made when I was a CEO of a company is we had people joining into dimensions of the company that I didn't understand. I'm not a tech guy by trade. Had a couple classes of programming, but not enough to know the ins and outs and pick winners on the development side. Very easy to go out, find people you trust, you like, and find out later that they're not as good as you thought. So the key tip is every time you kind of go down a path proactively where you know it's out of your sweet spot, go out and get advisors in. This is one of the perfect roles for advisors. Come in, interview those people for you. Don't just think you'll figure it out. Okay? All right. Firing fast. You've probably heard it before. It's a very painful thing. I've never been good at it. I fired probably a dozen people plus, maybe more than that. I've always done it too late. It's very easy in most cases to rationalize why someone who is not doing a great job should stay, might be able to stay. But it turns out by the time you've realized they need to be fired, they're already caustic. There's a great phrase that it's hard to live up to, but I think is a good guiding light for this. When there's doubt, there's no doubt. When it gets to the point where you're talking about whether to keep someone, gone. I have a friend, mentor, who has been very successful, had 9-figure exit. He has a philosophy that when you fire someone, you fire all of their friends too, which I think is a little extreme. But his thinking is that you carve out all of the would-be bad blood in the company. Yeah. I think the key here is I've found even people who are friendly with each other, when they know someone's in the wrong role and they're not performing, they're dying for you to do it, even if they're buddies. Every time we've hesitated and finally got around to it, all the people around them who we thought were their close friends were like, oh, thank God, this person's gone. We were picking up after them. People talk a lot about culture. I've tried to contrive culture. It doesn't work. The only real thing I think you can control as a founder in building a great culture, there's probably some dimensions around what you stand for and vision, but the asset you can put in place and optimize for is talent. And every time you have someone in an office Even if they're great people, if they're not carrying their weight, you're eroding away at the culture, the goodwill, the enthusiasm of the team. Fire fast, very, very hard. But if you do this, your odds of succeeding go way up. I like, it's not the first person, but a lot of people, myself included, like to compare starting a company to a marathon. I think that's a very appropriate comparison, although I would argue it's not the right thing to think of a startup as a marathon. I think rather you should think of it as 5,000 steps. And if you think of it that way, one, it's a lot less daunting. Running a marathon is a lot of work, but setting up a bank account, not that big of a deal. Forming a company, really not a big deal. It's a lot of little steps that are all trivial, which in sum become this company. The thing is, I actually don't think the core asset of the company is anything you build or anything you hire. I think those are all critical assets, but those are all a function of decisions you make. So I would argue it's not really 5,000 steps, it's 5,000 decisions. And they're all small decisions. And if you get more of those right than wrong, you're going to stay on the path. If you start getting them wrong, you're going to go off into the weeds, and trip and lose. The game what you have to think about is how you can make sure you're positioning yourself to make the best decisions and all these small decisions that are in front of you along the way. And I believe if you bring on veterans to help you, you can have a better shot at that. And it really is about decisions. Why didn't any of you start Facebook? It started with just a person. Why didn't you guys do Google? I didn't either. It's just a series of decisions that is the difference between a person and something that becomes a vision for a company. If you have veterans, you might make better decisions along the way. But my last tidbit for you is that everyone has bad advice. So you need to get your veterans to help you, but you need to be ready to call BS on some of the stuff they tell you. I had one of a VC from one of the most famous firms in the country look at a company I'd started. I was CEO of it a while ago, and they gave me the terrific advice that I should run product of the company because I, as a CEO, really understood the pain point. I got it. Well, it turns out running product is more than just understanding pain. It's translating that into a product that makes sense, that encapsulates the vision. And it was that advice probably cost us 6 months of development. It was shitty advice. The person's very smart. They're a great investor. They just don't know anything about building product. So when you go out and pick all of your advisors, just be very careful. Understand the scope of someone's expertise. And at the end, you have to defer to your own good judgment to make sense of things. Saw the book. I've also got a webinar you can find on Udemy/Raise Capital. It'll blow your mind. All right, good. I got to laugh there. Interplay's hiring actively. We're growing very rapidly. So if you're interested in being a co-founder and working with someone who can help you build a company, if you're interested in joining a company in many capacities, land on interplay.vc. You can fill out an application on the website. We are looking for a lot of people. And you can find me on my blog here and on Twitter. We'll do questions.
What if there's promise of equity or equity with your early founders, and if they don't perform, how would you go about that?
The question was, if you have early founders who have equity and they don't perform, how do you handle it? The key is to put vesting structures in place proactively from day one. Typically for an employee, you'll see a 4-year vest with a 1-year cliff. That means they get no equity until they've completed 12 months of operations without being terminated. And then typically they get 1/36 of the remaining equity each month for the remaining 3 years. You may find with founders and people who have larger stakes, the vesting period will be longer, sometimes as much as 6 years.
And it doesn't matter when do they join? I mean, if you have a developed product already or you are already in market?
Those are negotiating items. You can find on my blog, if you search management equity compensation benchmarks, it's long. I remember it because it's probably the post I use the most. It's got a schedule of typical equity thresholds by level. Post Series A is what it says. The time I put that up, Series A, it was the seed that is now. It was the first equity round. Seed is now the first equity round, so look at it in that light. If you're pre-fundraising, you can anti-dilute those by 20 or 30%, and that'll give you an indication of what they should be before the investment.
Thanks.
I think it's working now.
Cool.
You mentioned the value of getting advisors on board. How do you get advisors? What type of contracts you can structure with advisors? How do you seek advice?
Question is, how do you get advisors? I think it is a networking and personal relationship game. The advisor system has really polar scenarios. There's a lot of advisors who just put their face on your PowerPoint, and you give them a piece of equity for that, and I think that's pretty useless. As an investor, I've been a VC before starting Interplay at 2 different venture funds here in the city. That's never been a material weighting in the decision to invest. But if you find people who will take the call or will get involved, then you can value the contribution in a material way. There's a whole spectrum of how people get involved in that regard. But the contracts usually have some vesting component, not always, and then they're equity based.
So just based on your experience, what would be appropriate equity to give to an advisor who's really involved?
It really depends on how involved they are, who they are. There's a wide array.
Sure, thank you.
There's not an easy answer to that because the spectrum's huge.
No worries, appreciate it.
We can take 2 more.
2 more questions.
All right, Mark Davis.
Okay.
Round of applause.
Hey.